different provisions of this 1935 Act. Then we have to understand that what exactly was a defect or the problems or the limitations of this act. And then we have to remember what exactly was the Indian reaction. Always remember this, they generally ask question on Indian reaction. So Indian reaction is also important, because Indian nationalists never accepted this 1935 Act. They consider it as disappointment, right. So 1935 Act was never accepted, but the fourth part, right, importance of this 1935 Act, importance of this 1935 Act. Why importance is important, right, because it is still a milestone, and as you all know that our constitution, right, derived many provisions, right, from this 1935 Act. So 1935 Act, when you prepare for your examination, you have to remember not only the provisions of this 1935 Act, you have to remember some important defects, you have to remember some important comment reactions by the Indian nationalist, right, and then you have to remember some important contribution of this 1935 Act, and that would be, right, considered as the analysis of 1935 Act. Is this okay? Right. So when we say provisions of 1935 Act, you will remember that 1935 Act is generally known for a new concept, right. This concept was All India Federation, right. So this act provided for the establishment of an All India Federation consisting of the provinces and the princely states, right, as units. So whenever you remember 1935 Act, the first keyword is All India Federation. So what is the meaning of it? What it finally sought to do? It finally sought to break up the unitary system, and they conceptualized, they tried to experiment a new concept called federation, All India Federation, right. So what we have to remember, that the provinces were for the first time recognized in law as a separate entities exercising executive and legislative powers in their own field, right. So first keyword in 1935 Act, All India Federation. Second keyword in 1935 Act was three list. The act divided the powers between the center and the units into items of three list, namely the federal list, the provincial list, and the concurrent list. So three list. Federal list for the center consisted of 59 items, you must be knowing it. Provincial list 54 items, and then concurrent list, right, for 36 items. And remember it, that the residuary powers were vested with the viceroy, right. So two keywords in 1935 Act, All India Federation, second three list. Third keyword in this 1935 Act was provincial autonomy. It was the biggest development in the constitutional history of India. Always remember this 1935 Act abolished the diarchy in the provinces of 1919 Act, and it introduced provincial autonomy, and it provided for, you can say, the adoption of diarchy at the center. It abolished diarchy in the provinces, and it provided for the adoption of diarchy at the center, right. So this is also one of the key point in 1935 Act. And then one more important development, 1935 Act introduced bicameralism in 6 out of 11 provinces, and this bicameralism was there in, right, if you can remember, Assam, Bengal, Bombay, Bihar, Madras, and United Province, right. And then apart from this keyword, you have to remember that this 1935 Act provided for the establishment of federal court, it provided for the establishment of Reserve Bank of India, RBI, it provided for the establishment of Federal Public Service Commission, and it further extended the principle of communal representation, right, depressed classes, women, workers. And then one more, it abolished the Council of India when it was established in 1858 Act, right. So this you have to remember. And then one, if you can remember one more, it separated Burma from India, and 2 new provinces were created, Odisha and Sindh. So these are some important provisions that, like, that we should remember for our examination, right. Okay, these are, you can say, this provision you have to remember, and this is not, you can say, it's not a big deal to remember these provisions, you can remember it. Now come to the analysis part. When you analyze the, you can say, 1935 Act, you should analyze the 1935 Act in the context of responsible government. You know why? Because the idea was to give responsible government. Demand was, right, responsible government. So we should analyze this 1935 Act in the context of responsible government, right. So when you analyze it, you get this idea that this act was not, you can say, expecting or not coming to the expectation of, nationalism. That time, and it had some defects. Like the first defect was the envisaged federation and what they talked about never came into being. Federation never came into being as the princely state did not join it. Then the power given to the ministers, right, provincial autonomy, the power given to the ministers was hedged in with safeguards and restrictions. Remember these two words, safeguard and restriction. What is the meaning of these safeguard and restriction? They took away with one hand what was given by the other, right. So, this was the greatest limitation of 1935 Act, right. For example, if I can explain this, what they you can say took away with one hand what was given by the other, like for example that, right, apart from the power to promulgate ordinances during the recess of the legislature, the governor had independent power of legislature. The second, apart from the governor power to veto, a bill was passed, right, in the central legislature, and it was subject to veto, by the crown also if it is passed by central legislature. Then, so second veto. Then Governor General can prevent discussion in the legislature and suspend the proceedings, right, in discharge of their special responsibility. And then with respect to certain matters, no bill or amendment could be introduced in the legislature without the Governor General's previous sanction. So, what they are doing? They are providing breaks. Are you getting my point? They are giving it, but they are taking it. They are providing breaks, and therefore, some nationalists reacted against this kind of provision, 1935 Act provision, right. So, according to Jawaharlal Nehru, the ifs and the buts provided in the act were so numerous that it provided a machine with strong brakes. Very important comment by Jawaharlal Nehru. So, we talked about those safeguards, right, those special responsibilities, those restrictions, they were numerous, you can say, and they provided a machine with strong brakes. Then even Muhammad Ali Jinnah described the scheme of this act as thoroughly rotten, fundamentally bad and totally unacceptable. So, Indian nationalists, they were not happy with this act, and then C. Rajgopalachari called this act as worse than diarchy. So, these are some important criticism, reaction. So, Indian leaders were not satisfied with this 1935 Act, right. But still, I said, still this act is very important, and if you have some sense of history, Indian National Congress criticized this act, but still they were ready to fight election under this act, right, in 1937. So, this act is important in some context, right. So, what exactly is the importance of this act? So, this act occupies a very important and permanent position in the constitutional history of India, permanent position in the constitutional history of India. It is a lengthy document, it is a detailed document having 321 section and 10 schedule, and this act endeavored to give a written constitution to the country, right. So, we have to remember that for our present constitution also this 1935 Act is very, very relevant. The structural part of the constitution is to a large extent derived from 1935 Act, right. Federal scheme, governor's office, emergency provision, Public Service Commission, administrative details, all this derived, you can say, from 1935 Act, right. And always remember it, that the first time you have popular ministries formed in the provinces at least, and it can be regarded as a very important development. Popular ministries for the first time in the provinces. So therefore, when you analyze 1935 Act, we can always consider it as a milestone on the highway leading to a full responsible government in India. So we should always consider this 1935 Act as a very important act in the constitutional history of India, right. So thanks a lot.